Welcome, everyone. We're just going to take a few more moments to let everybody get a chance to log in tonight. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. My name is Joanne. I will be your moderator for tonight's webinar. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and you will have a copy of the recording emailed to you within the next 24 hours, along with a copy of the slides. You've already been automatically muted at the start of the webinar, but if you have a question to ask, you can use the chat panel to ask us any questions you may have and communicate with us throughout the presentation. At the very end, we'll be able to go over some of the questions as a group and answer any additional questions you may have at that time. Now I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa to start the presentation.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Alyssa. I'm an attorney with the Monteleone Law Group. Sorry. And that's, I was saying I was an attorney with the Monteleone Law Group, and I handle all of our estate planning and elder law matters for our clients there. Tonight's webinar is part 2 of our series. Our first webinar focused on estate planning, and that we had about 2 weeks ago. And if you missed the first one, we're actually going to post it onto our website so you can replay it there if you're interested in hearing what we had to say. That webinar focused a lot about making decisions for yourself. And tonight we're going to talk about making decisions for someone else. And what do you do when someone names you as their power of attorney or their healthcare proxy? Because those are very big decisions that you have to make. And sometimes you have no input from the person that's asking you to make those decisions. In my experience, I have a lot of clients that come to me and say, I want to name my son, I want to name my daughter, I trust them, I know they'll do the right thing. And then when we put together this great plan and it comes time for them, for son and daughter to make the decisions for mom, we realize, wait a minute, you have no idea what you're doing. So that's why I wanted to do this presentation tonight, because it's very easy for people to get themselves into trouble, not on purpose, but it just happens sometimes. So a lot of our focus tonight will be on what do you do when you're a power of attorney, when you're an agent under a power of attorney, or when you're a healthcare proxy. When I was putting together this presentation, I realized that there was a lot of information that I wanted to share with everyone. And if I did it all in one night, we could be here for 3 hours. So instead of doing that, I did put together a couple of handouts that you can download that talks about what am I supposed to be doing if I'm also a trustee or an executor of someone's will. Typically, if you're in that role, you are working with an attorney anyway, so you do have guidance. But when you're someone's agent under their power of attorney or you're their healthcare proxy, sometimes you can just be out there on your own trying to navigate this and figure it out. And that's why we're going to spend the bulk of our time tonight talking about those roles. So I lost my mouse. Here we go. So you can download, there's a few handouts that you can download and save for future reference. So the information that we're presenting tonight is just for informational purposes only. It's not to be relied on for legal advice because everyone's situation is different. And if you do have a specific situation that you want to talk about, we can certainly talk about that offline and schedule a consultation. Here are two topics that we'll be talking about tonight. The first is acting as an agent under a power of attorney, and the second is acting as a healthcare proxy. So we're going to be talking through this using a hypothetical from a situation from one of my clients. Recently, a client of mine named Casey Client came and she met with me. She's ready to put her estate plan together. She's getting older. She wants to make sure her affairs are in order. And we talked a lot about who she'd feel comfortable with making decisions for her. And she explained that she felt comfortable with you being her healthcare proxy and her power of attorney. Yes, you guys. You are longtime friends with Casey and she trusts your judgment and she feels that you'd be the best suited to help her make her decisions if she's unable to speak up for herself. So first we're going to talk about what do I do when I have to act as Casey's power of attorney, when I'm her agent under her power of attorney. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details, we're going to talk about some legal jargon first. What is a fiduciary? You may hear that term every once in a while, especially when you're talking about dealing with someone's money. And that is the legal lingo for for a person who is responsible for managing money or assets of another individual. So if you are a power of attorney, if you are a trustee or an executor, you are a fiduciary. You're responsible for managing someone else's money or assets. Anytime we're dealing with a power of attorney, there is a relationship there. It's a principal and agent relationship. So Casey in this situation is the principal. She is the one that is delegating the power to her agent, you, to act on her behalf. And anytime that you're acting on Casey's behalf, you always need to be acting in her best interest. So you have to put your interests aside, your wants, your wishes, your desires, and act in Casey's best interest in everything that you do. So when you are a fiduciary, there's 4 main duties that you have to make sure that you're upholding. And we're going to briefly talk about them tonight. There's a lot of information in this presentation tonight, so this is really a good one. If you're a note taker, you might want to get a pen and jot down some notes. Also, one of the handouts is the PowerPoint with lines, so you could take notes if you want to quickly print that, so you can take notes if you want. So the first duty that you have to be responsible for as Casey's agent is acting in her best interest. So there's several things that you need to do to make sure that you are upholding this duty. And the first is making sure that you read and understand her power of attorney. Sometimes they're really long, thick documents and sometimes they're very straight and to the point. But every power of attorney is going to list out all the specific things that you can and can't do. So making sure that you read it and understand it so you know what you can and can't do is important. Because if you go outside of the scope of that document and do something that you're not supposed to do, you could be personally liable for that. So if you think, I need to sell Casey's house to help get her some money to put her in a nursing home, but her power of attorney actually doesn't give you that power to do that, you're in big trouble if you do something to sell her house. And the other really important thing is to know when the power of attorney is effective, because sometimes they're effective from the date someone signs it, and other times they're effective at a certain point in time. So most power of attorneys that we draft, they're effective at the time that you sign it, but others not so much. Maybe someone has to be deemed incapacitated. Maybe it's only for a certain period of time where someone's out of the country, or for a certain period of time after someone has had been in surgery and is recuperating. So you really need to know when you can act. The other important thing is to really make sure that you are involving Casey in your decisions as much as possible. Even if you can involve the person in your decision making. A lot of times we know that people they are unable to speak for themselves, so you have to either know what they wanted before they became incapacitated, or you need to use your best judgment. But at any time, whenever you're making decisions for someone else, you want to try to involve them in the decisions as much as possible. And a big thing also is to make sure that you're avoiding conflicts of interest. This is where a lot of people get themselves in trouble. So making sure that you aren't doing something that will benefit someone else at Casey's expense. For example, if Casey has a flood in her home and you need to hire a plumber to go and fix the pipe that caused the flood, it wouldn't be okay for you to hire a plumbing company that her son works for, because there's him or his company is going to get a monetary benefit that's coming out of Casey's bank account. So you want to try to make sure that you're avoiding any conflict of interest, or even the appearance of a conflict of interest. So making sure that if I have to hire someone, that I can go outside of any family or friends that we may know and hire a third party that has no relationship to us. Also, buying, if you have to sell something of hers, maybe you have to sell her car, she's not driving anymore. Well, you can't go and buy that car. You can't sell it to your wife or your significant other or your husband. That is a conflict of interest. So it's definitely something that you want to avoid as someone's agent. Another thing is do not gift, borrow, or loan any money away, unless the power of attorney allows you to do that. And it's very specific. There's a lot of different rules on how you can gift money away or loan money. And there's a lot of reasons why you want to be very careful when you're doing this. So I practice in New York, and I also practice in Virginia, and there's different rules on how to do this and how to spell this out in your power of attorney. But gifting is a very important thing to be able to do for certain circumstances. For instance, if you're managing Casey's money and she needs to become eligible for Medicaid, and you need to take her money and put it into a trust to protect it, that's considered a gift. But if her power of attorney doesn't allow you to do that, you've got a problem now. Because if you gave that money away to the trust, you could potentially be in trouble. So you want to make sure that you're not lending any money, borrowing money, or giving it away without making sure that you really actually have the power to do that. And when you get into certain situations like that, it might be a good idea to consult with an attorney to make sure that you are actually doing the things that you've been given the power to do. And the last two things we'll go over quickly is don't pay yourself. Sometimes when people act as someone else's agent, they have the authority to be paid for their services, and some people just think they're entitled to be paid for their services. But you can't actually pay yourself unless Casey has said that you can. So before you do that, make sure that you can get paid and what you want to pay yourself is reasonable. Because some people think that their services are invaluable, and then the next thing you know, you've bled Casey dry, and that's not something that you want to do. Last, you want to make sure really that you are avoiding changing any of Casey's estate plan that she has set up currently. A lot of times power of attorneys can change the beneficiaries on life insurance policies and retirement accounts, and we like to try to avoid doing that, but sometimes a situation arises where you have to do that, and again, another situation where you want to be really careful about what you're doing. The second duty that you would be responsible for as a power of attorney is managing Casey's money and property carefully. You really need to know when you step in the role of someone's agent is really what all do they have? What am I responsible for? Because everything you do could eventually be put under a microscope. If someone has an issue with the way that you're doing your job, you could be asked to account for everything you're doing. So anytime you're paying bills, you're managing money and bank accounts and investments, it's really important to have a paper trail for everything and making sure that you're using your common sense and you're having really good judgment about everything you're doing. So here are some things that I think are really good idea to implement as best habits when you're handling someone else's money. So the first thing I would do if I was acting as Casey's agent is to make a list of her income. I would want to know where all of her money is coming from. Social Security, pensions, maybe she's got an annuity that gives her some money every month. I want to know where all that money is so I can account for it. The next, I'd want to know all of her assets and all of her debts. I want to make sure that I know if she's got a house that I need to make sure is secure and that the mortgage is paid and the taxes are paid, and that if she has any debts, I need to make sure that everything's paid on time. And the second thing would to make sure that her property is protected, right? Maybe she's in a nursing home, but Casey owns a house. I need to make sure that the house is properly secured, that it's properly maintained, that the insurance is kept current, and that I'm not doing anything to diminish the value of that property. Then I would also be looking at her investment accounts, and I'd be making sure that I'm investing carefully. If I don't know what kind of investor Casey is already, I would want to make sure that I could figure that out. So if Casey can't tell me herself, I would want to go and talk to her financial advisor or whatever financial institution who is holding or managing her investments, and see if I could get my hands on copies of past statements so I can kind of see what kind of investor was Casey. Was she someone that was very conservative and just invested in bonds and CDs, and that's what I need to continue? Or did she have more of an aggressive strategy behind her investment? So I would need to make sure that I understood that and then made the appropriate changes. The other thing would be to pay her bills and her taxes on time. I would hope that's common sense for a lot of people. And also collecting her debts. So if she's loaned money to people, or maybe Casey has rental properties and someone owes a rent every month, that I'm making sure that I'm collecting that money out there that's due to her. And then the last thing would be to make sure I take steps to have her power of attorney accepted. This is something that as a lawyer I run into all the time. I'll have someone call me up and say, the bank doesn't accept mom's POA, or the financial advisor, they won't talk to me. What do I do? So it's your job as the power of attorney to try to get the bank to accept the power of attorney, let you manage the accounts and do your job the way that you've been appointed to do it. And sometimes if you have tried to escalate it to managers and supervisors or the higher ups in whatever organization you're trying to get to accept this power of attorney, sometimes you do have to get an attorney involved to send a letter to try to force their hand and accept this power of attorney. And it's just something that you'd have to do as being someone's agent. The next duty is making sure that you keep your money and Casey's money and property separate. So separate means separate. It's not, I will pay something for you and then you're going to pay me back. No, you're going to keep your money in your bank account and Casey's money in her bank account. And what we call this, when anytime these things get mixed, it's called commingling. And that's what we want to avoid. So if you actually look at the picture, there's blue paint and yellow paint. And when it mixes together, it makes green. And what the problem with commingling is we don't know when all this paint mixes together and it makes green, we don't know where the blue paint stops and the yellow paint starts. Same thing happens when you commingle property. When you put it all together and it gets mixed up, it's really hard to untangle and figure out where your money is how your money is separate from Casey's money. So you want to make sure that you keep everything separate. One way that we do this is by avoiding joint accounts. And I know a lot of times parents want to put their kids on their bank accounts just as a matter of convenience. I really don't think that a lot of times that's the best thing to do, because you may solve one problem, but you can create a number of other problems. So the nice thing about paying power of attorney is I can be listed on Casey's bank account as an agent and I could make decisions for her, but I'm not an owner. And I think that is a good thing to do to help make sure that her money really does stay separate from you, because you're not supposed to be an owner. You're just supposed to help her manage these assets. You also want to make sure that that you're keeping the title in Casey's name to all of her assets and her money, so other people can tell what's hers and what's yours. So as I was just mentioning, making sure that you're listed as an agent and not an owner, that's very meaningful right there. The last two things, well, paying Casey's bills from her funds, not yours, is a big thing, because I have a lot of people that say, oh, I'm going to pay Casey's or mom's bill from my account and mom will just pay me back. I would really try to avoid that, because a lot of times you kind of just end up down the rabbit hole on that. After a lot of times, maybe it's hard to keep track of how much mom owes you or how much you've paid out for mom, because you have no paper trail at that point. So it's really important that if it's something that if it's Casey's bill, it comes out of Casey's money, not your money, and then you pay yourself back with Casey's money. I would avoid that under all circumstances. But the last thing I want to talk about is knowing how to sign your name when you're acting as someone's power of attorney. And this gets people into trouble a lot, and they don't even realize it, especially with nursing homes. Anytime when you're acting on someone's behalf, you never want to just sign your name, because then you're signing and you could potentially be accepting personal responsibility on someone else's behalf. This comes up a lot in nursing homes. One thing that happens is the nursing home will say, oh, Casey, you want her to come live here? That's fine, that's great. Here's this contract that we need for you to sign so Casey can come live here and we can care for her. And you just sign your name, thinking, I'm signing up for Casey. But actually, that's not true. You could potentially be accepting the liability to pay that nursing home bill every month. The way that you should sign when you're someone's agent is if you would sign your name as agent for Casey client. So if I was acting for Casey, I would sign everything that was for her, Alyssa Monteleone, as agent for Casey client. So that way I'm giving notice to the people that I'm just her agent. I'm not signing saying, yes, you can send the bill to me every month. I'm signing as Casey's agent, and that I'm not taking on any personal liability, that it all still stays with Casey. So that's something very important. I think that's the number one thing where people tend to get themselves in trouble, is they accidentally sign up for stuff that they didn't mean to, and then it comes back around later on and it bites them. The last duty that that an agent under a power of attorney needs to do, and this is a big one, is keep good records. Everything you do needs to have a paper trail. Like I had mentioned earlier, a lot of times if someone thinks that you're doing something improperly, or someone doesn't like that, maybe someone's upset that you're the power of attorney and they're not, they can raise an issue with that, and they can come and ask you to account for everything that you've been doing. And I think sometimes that is necessary, that there are a lot of instances where people do steal from the elderly. It's a big issue. But I'm usually on the other side, where I'm writing the scary lawyer letter to the person asking them to account for their actions, I would hate to be on the receiving end of that letter. So because of that, I would say anytime you're doing anything for someone, that you keep a very good record. And really, the good record keeping habits come down to these very basic things. Making sure that you're keeping a detailed list of everything that you receive or spent. And I would be detailed about that. I would write down, keep a journal. Um, what are the dollar amounts of the checks that I've written for or deposited? When did I do that? Why did I do that? Who did I write the check from? You might even want to consider having a software like Quicken to keep track of all this stuff. So if you were audited, if you were asked to account for everything that you've done, that you could just print out reports and hand it over, and that just shows how organized and detailed you are, because this is important stuff. Keeping receipts and notes, even for small expenses, that's a really big one, right? If um, if you need to run out and get something small to make a small repair in the house, I would make sure that you get a receipt for that, no matter how big or small. And avoid paying cash. I know sometimes maybe you might get a better deal from the handyman if you paid him cash, but a lot of times when you do that, you don't have, you're not able to keep as detailed records as you would like. So I really would avoid paying cash for everything. And I would try not to use the ATM card for cash withdrawals as well. That's another thing that's really hard to account for after a while, because you don't really have receipts when you can't always get good receipts when you're using cash. And again, here we are talking about paying ourselves. If you can, if Casey has told you that you can pay yourself, then you need to make sure that it's reasonable. And that really depends, that's different on a case-by-case basis. Reasonable for some people is different for reasonable for others. If Casey has, you need to pay her mortgage and some other expenses, and it's really simple, and you're only spending a couple hours a month doing this, that amount of money that you would pay yourself may be different if you're making sure that her business is ran and she has a number of investments that you need to keep up with. So I would say that this is another instance of where you have something that's a case by case basis. And in order to make sure that you can justify your fee, that you really should keep good records about what you've been doing, how much time you've been spending doing it for someone, what have you been doing and why did you do it? So again, you really need to document everything that you've been doing. It could be really tedious depending on what you need to do to help this person who's named you as their agent. There's some other issues that pop up when you're acting under someone's power of attorney. So we'll talk about a handful of them. The first is, what happens if there are other agents? Sometimes people name more than one person to be their agent under their power of attorney. I don't usually think this is a great idea, because what happens if Casey were to name you and her son Johnny to act as her agents? What happens if neither of you could agree on any of the decisions that need to be done? That really doesn't help Casey at all. Or what happens if she names you to act independently of one another, and you know that Johnny is doing something that's harming Casey? Maybe he's stealing her money. You still have an obligation to act in her best interest. So this is where things get tricky if someone has named two people to act at the same time. The ideal situation, the ideal setup would be for Casey to have named you as her primary agent and then Johnny as her successor agent. And the nice thing about that is that Johnny can't do anything until you're not around to act as Casey's agent anymore. Successor agents have no power until the primary agent leaves their position. So if they're unable or unwilling to act. So that really is nice, because it could circumvent a lot of the issues that would pop up if two people are trying to act at the same time. Another thing that comes up a lot is working with professionals. Sometimes, depending on the type of assets you're dealing with or someone's situation, you might have to consult with professionals, an accountant, a financial advisor, an attorney, real estate agent, and that's perfectly fine. I actually encourage that if someone is an agent under a power of attorney and they really don't know all of what they're supposed to be doing, or maybe they're great with managing money and making sure the bills are paid, but they have a lot of tax questions because they're not really they're unsure of Casey's tax situation. It's a great idea to consult with a professional. So I would say best practice anytime you're consulting with a professional, especially on behalf of another person, would be to make sure that you're checking their professional qualifications. I would say you want to check someone's credentials. So for me, I'm an attorney, I'm licensed with the bar. I would say make sure before you want to consult with me to see if I can be Casey's attorney is to make sure that my license, that I don't have grievances against me, and that I'm actually an attorney in good standing and I don't have my license taken away from me. And I would also make sure, check my complaint history, right? That's something that you want to know before you get involved with someone, because you don't want to be engaging with a professional that might cause you more harm than good. Another thing that you want to do is interview them. Interview the professional thoroughly to make sure that they can handle what you're needing them to do. For instance, I'm an elder law attorney. I handle elder law matters, estate planning matters. But if you came to me with a criminal law matter, I would probably cause more harm. You might end up in jail if you ask me to represent you. So making sure that you're interviewing this attorney or whoever the professional would be to make sure that they actually can handle the work that the situation that you're bringing to them, and that they're going to help you find a solution and not create other issues. And anytime you're entering into a contract with the professional, you want to make sure that you're reviewing this contract before you're signing it, that you're understanding the scope of the work that's involved and the fee that the professional is going to be asking you to pay. You want to make sure that those things are spelled out in the contract. So again, trying to avoid an issue later on. And the last thing is making decisions based on facts and advice. You are the final decision maker. You're the one that Casey has put in charge to make these decisions for her. So whenever you're working with a professional, it's really that you have the final say, and you need to consider the situation and their advice to figure out what would be in Casey's best interest before you make that final decision. Financial exploitation is a real hot topic now when dealing with the elderly. I feel like every day I turn around, you can just Google financial exploitation, and the list of the people who are either scamming the elderly or taking advantage of the elderly, it grows by the day. And there's a lot of people try to take advantage of the elderly, and this could be through financial abuse and exploitation, people taking money without permission, or even if Casey has lent money out and someone's not doesn't feel that they need to repay that money, is another example of financial abuse. Or also people charging too much for their services because they think that they could maybe try to get over on someone who's elderly because they won't understand, or they won't catch on to it. These are all situations where elderly people can be exploited and or abused financially. So there's a lot of things to keep an eye out when you're dealing with an elderly person's finances. I'm gonna go over some of the things that I look out for, and some common signs. What I've also done is, in one of the handouts that you can download, I have put together a list of different consumer scams, signs of financial exploitation, and some resources if you think that someone is being financially abused or exploited, or someone is the victim of a scam, where you can go to try to get some help to rectify that situation. I know a lot of times we don't realize until it's too late, until the money's gone. And it's really hard to catch the person that's been scamming mom out of all of her money. But if you suspect this, you need to report it as someone's agent. So things to watch out for: if you or Casey think property is missing, or you notice sudden changes in Casey's spending, these are two big things to watch out for. Um, if Casey says that she's afraid of a relative or caregiver or friend, or if she's visiting with someone, or actually, let me go back. If she's afraid of a relative, caregiver, or friend, that actually could be a sign of not just financial exploitation. It could also be a sign of physical abuse as well. So you definitely need to watch out if she's saying that she's uncomfortable with around someone. Um, or maybe you don't live with Casey. Casey has a family member or a caregiver that spends a lot of time with her or lives in her house, and that person is trying to keep her from having visitors, or um, monitoring her phone calls, or seems to be having a lot of influence or control over her decisions. That might be a sign that she is being exploited. So also, if you think that, if you notice sudden changes in Casey's spending, like she's starting to take out a lot of money without explanation out of her ATM account, or she's trying to wire a large amount of money, or she's not able to pay bills that she's normally paying, those also might be signs of things that you need to pay more attention to, because there might be something going on behind the scenes that you're not aware of up front. So if you notice these changes, I would dig into it a little deeper, because there might be something going on and someone exploiting Casey. And you want to make sure that you're trying to stop these things in their tracks, because a lot of times, like I said, it's too late. After the money's gone, after it's left the bank account, after it's been spent, a lot of times you're not going to be able to get it back. And this is someone's life savings a lot of times, that they've been milked out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they'll never see a dime of that money again. So you need to make sure that if you notice something, you need to report it and look into it more. As I mentioned before, consumer scams are a really big issue. Every day there's a new one. I was Googling this the other day when I was preparing for this presentation, and now they have coronavirus scams, where they're trying to get money from people. It's kind of pathetic. So this happens every day, and we really need to be aware of how to spot these scams. In the handouts that I uploaded for you guys to take a look at, I actually have a detailed list of all the different types of scams. There's probably like 15 on the list. But here's some tips on how you can spot them and things to do. So the first thing I would do, if you're noticing that Casey's getting a lot of spam calls, is I would put her number on the do not call registry, the National Do Not Call Registry. It might help alleviate some of those calls a little bit. But also, anytime that you are on the phone, or she's on the phone, or communicating with anyone, you need to make sure that we're not sharing numbers or passwords of accounts, or for our credit cards, or our social security number, because that's the information that scammers really want to get their hands on. So then they could wreak a lot of havoc with that information. And also, a lot of times people call and they have offers over the phone. And it's very important to understand that after you hear these sales pitch, you want to try to get information in writing from people, so that way you can read it and research it and figure out if it is too good to be true, because if it sounds like it's too good to be true, it probably is. And also, if you're asking for this information in writing and someone's hesitant and doesn't want to give it to you, probably is that way because it's a scam. You also want to watch out for deals where they want you to pay right now, pay today, because this offer is gonna expire, or they want you to put money up front to pay for taxes or fees on a prize that you're going to give to you later on. Again, those are also signs of a scam. You shouldn't have to pay up front for something and then wait to get it later on, because chances are you're never going to get it. Also, another thing is, Casey may already have been the victim of a scam and you just don't know about it yet. So it's important also to see if maybe she's already been scammed out of money. If you notice that Casey's been getting a lot of sweepstakes offers in the mail or things like that, or she gets a lot of mail, or she gets requests to pay people out of the state, out of the country, chances are she might already be a victim of a scam. And that's, again, something that you want to keep your eye out for. And if you suspect that, there is a list of resources of where you can go to report that information, because these scammers aren't out there just trying to scam Casey. They're trying to scam everyone over the age of 65, unfortunately. All right, so that about wraps up what we have, what I wanted to talk to everyone about being someone's agent under their power of attorney. And I think mostly what it boils down to is make sure you're keeping as really good detailed records as possible, and making sure that you're doing everything in Casey's best interest, and you want to avoid the appearance of or any conflict of interest. And if you can really just take the tips that I put out there and use them as your best practices, you should be in good shape. But again, make sure you're keeping very good records for everything that you do. So now for the last part of this, we're going to move on and talk about what do you do when you're someone's healthcare proxy. And that healthcare proxy is someone that makes medical decisions for someone else. So shortly after you get Casey's finances in order, she suffers a stroke, and she's unable to speak for herself or understand information, and she finds herself in the hospital. And now you are called on to help make her medical decisions for her. And there's a lot of decisions to be made, and the doctors are looking to you for answers. And you've never been in this situation before, and you're afraid that Casey's going to die, and you really don't know what to do. So this section is we're going to walk you through really what is it like to be a healthcare proxy, and what are some things that you need to consider. So when you are the healthcare proxy, you are the person that is required to make decisions just as the patient would be required to make decisions for herself. So you're making the same decisions that Casey would have to make for herself, and you would be getting the same access to the same medical information. You'd be talking to the medical team about different treatments and choices that she has. You'd be likely having to get second opinions and consultations from doctors depending on what the situation is, and you'd be consenting to treatment, either consenting or refusing medical treatment depending on the circumstance, and also having to possibly facilitate transfers to either other doctors or hospitals or even skilled nursing facilities. So being a healthcare proxy is actually a really big job, and a lot of decisions are life and death, and it's a big role to fill for someone. And I know it could be stressful to have to carry the weight around of wanting to make sure that you're making the right decision for someone, especially if they can't do it themselves. So how do I make all of these medical decisions? What do I do? Ideally, before you even get to the crisis, I would say that as soon as you know that you're someone's healthcare proxy, you really need to sit down with them and get an understanding of what kind of treatment are they and are they not okay with. A lot of people may feel that at the end of my life, I want all the medical treatments to help keep me alive as long as possible, spare no expense, do everything. And then there's a lot of other people that say, no, I do not want to live that way. I don't want a ventilator. I don't want a feeding tube. I don't want any of that. Just make me comfortable. And that's how I want to live the end of my life. It would be very helpful knowing that before you get to a crisis. So ideally, as soon as you know that someone's named you as their healthcare proxy, make sure you sit down and have that conversation. But sometimes we end up in a crisis, we end up in the hospital, and you don't know what to do. And always the first thing is get the facts. Figure out, what is Casey diagnosed with? Or if we don't know what she's diagnosed with, what do we think she's diagnosed with? What are the possibilities? What kind of testing does she need to have done? And will the outcome make a difference in the type of treatment that you're recommending, doctor? And how severe or advanced is her condition? So all these facts we need to know in order to make a good decision. Then the next thing would be is to figure out her treatment options. make sure that as the healthcare proxy, you're understanding what the risks and the benefits of all these treatments are. So will these treatments improve her condition? Can it be done on a trial basis? And then we could see if it's going to improve her condition. And if we can do it on a trial basis, how long should we try it for to see if it works? And what does a successful outcome look like for each treatment? And what are the possible side effects? That's a really big one. And also understanding why the doctors are making all of these different treatment recommendations. And the last thing is to figure out what Casey would have decided on her own. So sometimes we know this, sometimes she may have already told us, and other times she may not be able to tell us. Either we never had that conversation with her, or now she is unable to speak for herself because she's had a stroke. So if you can't figure it out, if you don't know the answer, you really need to make a decision using your best judgment, in Casey's best interest. And those are often really difficult decisions to make, because like I said, a lot of times it could be life or death. So when you're a healthcare proxy, you're usually working within the healthcare system, right? Sometimes maybe you're in a hospital or a skilled nursing facility or some medical setting. If you never spent a lot of time there before, it could be really intimidating, and you might not be able to know which way is up. There's a lot of things happening at once, a lot of different people, and sometimes it's hard to figure out who's in what role here, what's their responsibility. So how do we navigate this? What can you do? The first thing that I would do if I was a healthcare proxy for someone is to make yourself known to the staff, that they know that I am here, I'm Casey's healthcare proxy, I am the decision maker, and I'm the one that you need to keep informed, and you need to come to me with the information and come to me to make the decisions, no one else. I've had a lot of cases where mom and dad end up in the hospital and we have feuding siblings and they're fighting to make the decisions, and nurses and hospital staff, they're dealing with a lot of patients at once. It's very easy for them to get confused. And they may sometimes be releasing information to the wrong person and asking the wrong person to make decisions, whether they have a copy of the healthcare proxy or not. So it's really important to make yourself known to the staff. Another thing is you need to be flexible. You need to be ready for transfers. Maybe Casey's in the emergency room right now, but then she's going to be transferred to a different part of the hospital for some treatment. And then maybe in a couple days, she needs to go to a skilled nursing facility. So that's something that you need to be prepared for and you need to try to stay ahead of. And you need to make sure that you're definitely comfortable advocating for Casey and asserting yourself. You need to be able to speak up in these situations. If you think something's not right, if you don't understand something, if you need clarification, you have to raise your hand and speak up for her and try to get the information that you need to do your job. And another thing is always that you can always ask for a second opinion. If you don't think that you agree with the doctor's recommendation or you're not understanding something and you need a second opinion or another consultation with someone, you can ask for that. I know sometimes doctors don't have the best bedside manner and maybe you don't have a good rapport with them. So that might be a good idea based on the situation to get a second opinion from another doctor. And also considering time limited treatments to see maybe how they'll help Casey's condition. And if it doesn't, then it's something that you can move on to the next treatment, but definitely keeping an open mind to considering maybe not just one treatment, but maybe a couple different treatments depending on what Casey's condition is and if she could handle that. And the last two things, talking with doctors is really important, and I think that you have to prepare yourself to talk to doctors because, again, not every doctor has the greatest bedside manner, and sometimes it can be very intimidating. And I think that whenever you want to talk to a doctor, you really should prepare a list of questions and make sure you have a pen and a paper to jot down answers, because a lot of times they're giving a lot of information that maybe it's medical stuff. We're not all doctors. We may not all understand it the first time we hear it. So maybe we have to go back and review it later on when we're getting ready to make a decision. So if you're talking with a doctor, I would say have a list of questions ready and have a pen and paper in your hand. Another thing that maybe might not come to mind is hiring a private care manager, especially depending on the situation at hand. If you're unable to work with the medical team, or this is something that's overwhelming for you, it might be a good idea to consider hiring a private care manager. Now, they could be a social worker, someone with an advanced nursing degree, someone who would be able to step in your shoes and understand and get the information that's needed to make the decisions, and then consult with you and help coordinate the services and the care that Casey would need. Now, that is something it's a professional service, something that you could pay with Casey's money, but depending on the situation, it might actually be a really good idea. So I would always keep that in my back pocket. Another really fun situation that arises if you're a healthcare proxy is resolving disputes and getting help. So what happens if I'm in a situation where someone else doesn't agree with what I'm doing? The first thing we always look at is understanding your legal authority. So there's two ways you end up as healthcare proxy. Either Casey has appointed you as her healthcare proxy, like she has in this situation. But sometimes when people don't have a healthcare proxy, state law sets out a priority list of who can make those medical decisions for yourself. So in this case, we have an appointed healthcare proxy, and we know we have that authority to do so. But other times, it might not be so clear. So there's instances when sometimes maybe there's an individual, they don't have a spouse, but they have multiple children, and the children are all looked to make a decision on mom's behalf. And what happens when they don't agree? Maybe someone says mom doesn't need that treatment, and the other kids say that she does, and now we're in an argument. That's not helping mom get the best care that she needs. That's just creating more issues. So you need to understand your legal authority. Then sometimes there's issues where they can't be resolved as easily, and you want to maybe ask for an ethics committee meeting and to maybe help you get guidance on how to make this decision. What are the things that we need to be considering? What's the best outcome for Casey? If appropriate, you want to keep the family informed. Again, I said if appropriate. Everyone's family dynamics is different. So sometimes maybe you just need to make the decision and keep it moving. And other times you might have to have a family meeting. That really sometimes depends on cultural, depending on the family's culture or just the relationship and the dynamics between them. You might want to consider keeping people informed. And sometimes if you're in a nursing home, you might need to ask for a care planning meeting if, again, it's helpful to the situation. There is one of the handouts that I uploaded is a resource handout for different basically in the different settings that you could be in, whether it's a hospital or a long-term care facility or a nursing home. If you need help resolving a dispute, different people that you can go to to help you get the information you need to make a decision. All right, so we're going to wrap this up soon. There's a couple other miscellaneous issues that you want to deal with when you're acting as someone's healthcare proxy. The one thing is making sure that Casey's symptoms and pain are well managed. So patients need pain relief, and you want to make sure that the pain is well managed. Pain does not have to be a part of being sick. So understanding where that pain is coming from, how bad it is, and making sure that you're consulting with a doctor to make sure that she is comfortable if that's what she wants. Can we make a referral to a pain specialist is another important question to ask. Another big thing to know when you're a healthcare proxy is what to do in an emergency. If you're at home with Casey and she needs emergency help, obviously you're calling 911. But also you want to make sure that you have the key documents in your hand as the EMTs are arriving on site. Make sure that you have the healthcare proxy, and if she has a do not resuscitate order, that you have all the stuff handy to make sure that the EMTs know what to do when they're on site and how to treat her. What if surgery is needed? Sometimes you might be asked to consent to surgery, and you really need to consider whether the surgery is necessary and what would happen without it. What are my risks and benefits? How many times has a surgeon performed this procedure, and what's the outcome? How is the likelihood of success? What is the recuperation period that will result from the surgery, and what are the documents that you need me to sign, and how much time do I have to review them? Other miscellaneous issues is a DNR order appropriate? So CPR and respirators save many lives every day, but it might not be appropriate. If Casey is seriously and chronically ill and she's in fragile condition, CPR might do more harm than good. She may not want this. So making sure that if she doesn't already have a DNR order, is this something that I need to talk to her doctor and consider? And when someone goes into the hospital, it's assumed that they do want to be resuscitated. So making sure that if in fact we want a DNR order, that one is in place in the event of an emergency, especially if she goes into the hospital. But that's something that you'd want to consult with Casey's doctor about. What about hospice? For anyone that is dying, hospice should be something that's considered. And it's a program that has a medical team, pain management specialists, personal care, emotional care, and spiritual support to meet the patient's needs and wishes. It also helps family and the support systems. And they're on call 24/7, and they focus on supportive care and comfort and pain relief. So they can perform other services like respite care and palliative care, but hospice is usually also covered by many private insurances and Medicare. So I think that at some point it is something that needs to be considered as an option and something that you should have in your plan of care as a health. Feeding tubes help patients get the nutrients that they need and the fluids that they need, but sometimes it's unclear how helpful they're actually for someone that is in the last stages of their life and they are passing away. Not everyone that's dying it feels the sensation of thirst, so it actually may be okay if someone is not wanting to have artificial hydration and nutrition as a treatment for end-of-life care. So it's something, again, as you fulfill your duties in your role of a healthcare proxy, to make sure that you're trying to understand whether Casey wants this or not. And if you don't know and the conversation arises as to whether she needs it or not, that you are making these decisions with your best judgment based on what you do know. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. And we're making it in right on time. I thought we were going to go over. So if you want to keep up with what we're doing, we do a lot of, we've been doing a lot of webinars lately. We post a lot of information on social media. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Just a reminder, I have uploaded some handouts that I urge everyone to review. Now is your chance, the last couple minutes before we end this, to download them, to review them later. Also, if you are interested in setting up a consultation to discuss estate planning services, or maybe you are acting as someone's power of attorney or healthcare proxy, or you're a guardian and you want to have a conversation about something specific that you're dealing with, you will get a link to my calendar. After this is over, it's going to send a thank you email. You'll have the link to my calendar, and you can set up a time that works best for you. Or if there's something else you want to chat with us offline about, here's how you can contact us: our phone, our website, our email. And for the last couple minutes, I'm going to open up the questions. If anyone has a question, you should have the option of raising your hand. And then I'm going to unmute you. We have, okay, Denise, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
All right.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Fire away.
Great presentation. My one question is, though, What if it's a spouse? You're a POA for a spouse, and we talk about commingling funds and what have you. I think it gets a little bit more complex if you have a power of attorney for your spouse where your funds are already commingled.
It does.
Is
Yeah,
that a
and
little different?
a lot of this is case by case. So if you are power of attorney, let's say you have bank accounts together, well, you're joint owners at that point. So what's yours is, it's both of your monies at that point. But a lot of times power of attorney where it comes up with spouses is, I had one a couple weeks ago where they were trying to sell property and wife was, there was no power of attorney and she had dementia. She didn't have the capacity to understand what she was doing, and she was refusing to sign the papers to sell the house. So in that situation, you would need a power of attorney to be able to sign your husband's name on the closing documents to sell the house. So maybe it doesn't apply so much when you're talking about joint bank accounts, but definitely having a power of attorney for when other situations arise. I know also a financial advisor I work with, same thing with spouses and investment accounts. If there's no POA and husband can't make the decisions and sign the paperwork anymore, wife cannot get access to the money. And a lot of times we need that money to get husband the care.
Right.
So you married or not, you need a POA. So unfortunately.
But I mean, it would be the same POA, a power of attorney form is a power of attorney form, or they're all unique?
They are unique in that you can designate what power you're giving someone to do. So a lot of times I draft them very broadly to say, hey, I give my POA the power to do almost anything. But other times maybe we're going to give you the power to deal with any real property I have and then maybe I have a lot of investment accounts and my sister is great with investments and finances and I'll give her a POA to deal with that. So it really depends on a case by case basis.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's helpful.
No problem. Hold on, we got one more. Oh, there we go. Okay, Ellen, can you hear? I think I unmuted you. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, okay, now, hi, thank you for your presentation. What's the difference between a living will and a healthcare proxy?
That's a great question. So a living will and a healthcare proxy, they work together in conjunction with one another. So a healthcare proxy is a document that gives you the ability to appoint a person to act on your behalf and make decisions. The living will is another document that says what type of care and decisions you want to be made on your behalf. So the living will is where you put a lot of the decisions about end of life care. So if I want a feeding tube or I want to be on artificial respiration or I want pain medicine, that's where you'd put that in a living will. So they work together. If you ever hear also of these documents called advanced directives, they're kind of this one document that encompasses a living will and a healthcare proxy all smushed together in one. So in New York, we use those two documents. In other places, we do it just in one document.
And does the living will just count for end of life? But let's say, we're having this discussion, let's say it's not my end of life, but I have a heart attack. And if it says do not resuscitate, but, I've got to be resuscitated, I'm still healthy in all other ways. Yeah. Does it apply at that moment? Or does it apply that, there's no coming back ever? We know we're putting you in hospice, do not resuscitate there.
When I draft them, I give my clients the option. So you can say, hey, if it's obvious that I have a terminal condition, right, and I'm not coming back from this, then here's what I want you to do. I don't want to be on a ventilator. I don't want a feeding tube. But if you think that I am going to recuperate from this, by all means, give me everything you can. Okay. So it's something that you definitely can carve out what type of care in what situation you want. You could definitely put all that in your living will.
Great, thank you. Because we're always having conversations, we're like, some say yes, some say no, so that's great, thank you.
Yeah, no, you definitely need to delineate, like, if you think I'm gonna survive this, please, by all means, keep me alive. But if not, here's what I'd like. So yes, you can definitely.
Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else? see. I don't see anyone else. So that's it. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to email me or schedule a consultation. We could chat over the phone. I am doing video conferences, video consultations because of all these restrictions with COVID. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. This will be up for a replay if you wanted to listen to it again, along with our first part of the webinar. And in the next 2 weeks, we'll have the last part of our webinar series all about the new rule changes for Medicaid in New York. I know we have a bunch of people in Maryland and Virginia on tonight. So these are strictly Medicaid rule changes for New York, and I hope to see you all then. Thanks for joining, and have a great night.